Okay, this is a very quick review of the functions test version 1, question 2, which had to do with calculating a level bonus. And let's walk through the logic real quick here. Basically, you're supposed to calculate a score for a level up in a simple game, like what kind of bonus points would be given based on the difficulty and time taken of a particular game. So let's just go through this very quickly here. Got to have a function definition and two function calls. The function name is calculate level bonus. When you're given a function name in one of these problems, you have to use that function name. You can't go rogue and just make something up. This is in line with what would happen in the real world. If you're working on a team and they decide this is what the function is going to be called, then you need to stick with that. So if you didn't stick with this, you're going to lose some points on that, just as you would in the real world. You would lose some credibility, and people wouldn't like you nearly as much if you just went out and named things on your own and caused a lot of rework. Now, the function should take 3 parameters. All of them should have default values. Base points, what you start with, default value of 100. Difficulty is going to take a string, default value of normal. Time taken, default value of 60, which is going to represent seconds. And then we've got some logic on the inside. If the difficulty is set to easy, then we're going to take 25 points from the base points. If it's hard, we're going to add 50 points. If it's normal, there's no change. All right, time logic. This is important. After adjusting for difficulty, check the time taken. If it's less than 60 seconds, then you can add an additional 40 points as a speed bonus. Now, you don't need to add anything. You don't need to add a variable called speed bonus. You just need to add 40 points to the base points if they get that. At the very end, you've got your function calls. Okay, so no printing inside the function. So let's take a look at the solution here, or one version of the solution. The big thing is you've got two. Well, let's start off on the outside. We're going to define our base points on the outside. We're going to start them as 100. There is an initialization inside here, but just to make sure that we start off with base points outside of the function, we're going to start off with base points at 100. Here's the function definition. Okay, folks, I still have people who are not using the def keyword to define the function. Here's the function name. Here are your 3 parameters, all with default values assigned. Okay. On the inside, we're going to initialize this final bonus because this is what we want to return. If you look through the definitions, you're supposed to return this final bonus. So we're going to set that to 0 initially. It's going to exist only inside the scope of the function, calculate level bonus. It will not exist outside of that. We're going to return the value, but final bonus does not exist outside of that. Whereas base points exists outside of the function. All right, so inside the function, we've got final bonus set to 0, and now we have our logic here for the difficulty level. Notice that there are 2 different conditional trees. Okay, 2 different conditional trees. We're not trying to combine the difficulty and the time taken bonuses. They are 2 different things. And notice there are no returns until we have calculated all the bonuses or lack thereof after we've run these decision trees. Then there is a return. Several of you tried to return values inside here. We want to get all the calculations done, get that final bonus value updated, and then return the final bonus. Okay, so this logic just follows the directions. If the difficulty is easy, we take off 25 points. This could be rewritten as like this. All right, that's shorthand. If that was not true, then we can add 50. I'm going to keep with this short compound operator because this is what you would see in the wild as a professional. Final bonus, we would add 50 to that. And then I added the else in here just because it's good standard practice. It makes your code more readable. We're going to use the word pass, which just says, hey, just keep on trucking. Don't worry about whatever the condition was there. But it lets you see the end of the if, elif, else tree very clearly. You could get by with just if and elif, no problem. But just to make it more readable, it's nice to put that in there. Remember, you can't use the continue keyword there because we're not dealing with a loop. The continue keyword is associated with a loop, if you're wondering why you couldn't put that there. All right, so here we've set the difficulty level. Now we want to check the time taken. The condition was if it's less than 30 seconds. So we check to see if it was. If it is, then we're going to add 40 points to the final bonus. Notice that there's no secondary conditions or tertiary conditions. So we just have else and then pass again. And then outside of these trees, these conditional trees, I've got return final bonus. And you can see from the hanging indentation, there's your whole function. And some of you are still struggling with how to delineate, in other words, how to define where a function begins and ends. And it's all about hanging indentation. Unlike other languages, there are no curly braces to delineate or delimit where a function begins and ends in Python. It is all done by indentation. So we know this ends because this is the last hanging indentation. All this stuff goes together. And now we're back to the main program. Now notice function calls. After defining your function and then outside of the function body, your script or your code has to call the calculate level bonus function with no arguments. Okay, and it says store the return value in a variable and print that variable. So I created a variable called var1 and we call calculate level bonus. All right, we're just calling it with the default value. So I don't send any arguments. I don't send base points. I don't send difficulty. I don't send time taken. It's just going to use these default values. And so when I run this, it's going to send back final bonus. It's going to store it in var1, and then we've got our formatted f string here, and it will print that out. Same thing here. On this one, it asks us to store it into another variable. However, this time, we're going to use default values for base points and default values for time taken, but difficulty is going to be set to hard. All right, and then we're going to store that in var2, and then we're going to print the returning value when it comes back. And then finally, we didn't have to print anything else. We can just strike this from the response. So let's go ahead and run this. And we get var1 equals 0 and var2 equals 50 because they picked up 50 bonus points. We were just looking at the bonus points and not the overall base points. We could have added those in if we wanted to. Anyway, that's question 2, the calculate level bonus on the version 1 portion of the test.